3. Hello, Rai. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interview you. So, friends, here we have Roy Hunter, one of the pioneers in the field of hypnotherapy. Roy Hunter was certified in hypnotherapy by Charles Tebets in 1983. I was born in 1982, Roy. So you started out.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll be 80 in less than a year.
Yeah. So, friends, Roy has started um, teaching his mentors the 9-month professional hypnosis course in 1987 at Tacoma Community College in Tacoma, Washington. Roy has taught classes and workshops over the years in over 20 countries. That's quite a number, Roy. And he's the published author of several books based on the work of Tibbets and updated by his professional experience. His hypnosis texts are recommended or required reading in many hypnosis schools around the world, and he was inducted into the International Hypnosis Hall of Fame for his written contributions to the profession. His highly praised regression text was co-authored by Bruce N. Amer, PhD, a licensed clinical psychologist. Roy is also known for writing the textbook on parts therapy, which is the main theme of today's talk, published by Crown House Publishing in 2005. So that's the book, friends. And Roy, I'm going to provide all the Amazon links and your website links so that whoever is interested in your books, they can directly purchase from there. So once again, thank you very much, Roy. So here is my first question, which I asked. How did you get into hypnotherapy, Roy?
Well, for me, it was very personal because in 1982, I suffered a permanent back injury,
Oh, okay.
and a fractured disc was sticking into my spinal cord,
Mhm,
and the prognosis was very bad. The
mhm.
doctors told me that they would have to do surgery on my back to remove
Oh,
the spinal cord fragment that was, the disc fragment that was sticking into my spinal cord. And I had read some books on self-hypnosis and was using self-hypnosis and prayer, asking God to reduce the pain. And then while being wheeled down to the final X-ray and MRI before the procedure that was scheduled for the next morning, I suddenly felt all the feeling return to both legs. I had
okay.
zero reflex action in both legs prior to that. And then that evening, both my doctor and the surgeon came to my room and said, "We have canceled your procedure for tomorrow." And I said, "Why? What happened?" And they said, "Well, we have no medical or scientific explanation for what happened." And
Oh my
then
God.
after fumbling and mumbling a few almost unintelligible statements, my doctor said, "Do you ever watch Star Trek?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I happen to be a Star Trekkie. Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, the only thing I can say is it's as though Scotty teleported the disk fragment out of your spinal cord." He said, "We cannot explain what happened scientifically or medically. So in order to avoid questions that we cannot answer, we had to change your diagnosis." He said, in other words, there's no reason to go through with the surgery because it's like an angel did the surgery for us. He said the disc fragment is no longer sticking in your spinal cord. However, you have a missing disc and you'll suffer chronic back pain for the rest of your life and be on daily pain medication.
Okay.
I found out that through hypnosis, I was able to tame the chronic pain to a tolerable level without taking daily pain medication. So that was a great motivation for me to
Oh my God.
realize the power of the subconscious mind. So I've lived with chronic back pain for 4 decades,
God.
41 years as of this year, and have been able to live a normal life with limited physical activity. I used to play a wicked game of racquetball. I also loved tennis. I had to give up both of those sports because I found out the first time I played tennis several months after the injury, I knew I was putting the tennis racket down for the last time in my life. So
Oh,
I'm limited on the physical activity I can do, because if I were to use hypnosis to totally eliminate the pain, I could suffer further damage. So it's safer to tame the pain to a tolerable level rather than eliminate it totally, because pain is a warning something's wrong with the body.
yes, yes. Thank you
But
for that.
nonetheless, that helped me realize the power of the subconscious. So I got certified in 1983, and I started teaching professional hypnosis in 1987, and the rest is history. But even now, I still suffer chronic back pain, but it's tolerable.
Hmm.
And right now, on a scale of 0 to 10, I would say it's at a 1, because I'm sitting talking with you,
Yes,
and I enjoy sharing the benefits of
thank
hypnosis.
you. Thank you very much for sharing your story, Roy.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Roy, who coined this term parts therapy? There are so many confusions. What is the origin of the sports therapy, Roy? Could you please help us understand?
Well, Charles Tebbets pioneered the term parts therapy, but he got the idea from Paul Federn,
Mhm.
and he openly mentioned that in the classroom, because one of the qualities I greatly admired about my mentor and hypnosis teacher is that he gave credit to others where credit was due, instead of taking something and putting his own spin on it and trying to pretend that he originated it. So he gave credit to Paul Federn and Freud for parts therapy.
Okay. Okay.
And he was a pioneer of parts therapy. However, prior to his passing, he asked me to continue his work with it.
Okay.
There are variations. Um, One of the most common variations in the 20th century was ego state therapy, which was pioneered by John and Helen Watkins, and it was very similar to parts therapy. Then back in 2006, I taught parts therapy in Melbourne, Australia, and to my surprise, the protege of Watkins and Watkins, Gordon Emerson, who's a world-renowned psychologist and published author, attended my workshop. And when I met Gordon, it's like we became instant friends, because we were on the same wavelength, and I was very happy to have him at my parts therapy workshop. And he eventually went on to write the preface for the book, The Art of Hypnotic Regression Therapy, a clinical guide that I co-authored with Bruce Eimer, a pain psychologist.
Oh, wow.
He's now retired from the hospital where he was a pain psychologist, and has a psychology and hypnotherapy practice in Florida. And we became almost like brothers after meeting, because we were on the same page. We were opposed to the regression critics who want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because on regression therapy, there are a lot of mistakes for people who are not trained properly, such as the risk of false memories.
Yes.
So we addressed the concerns, which were legitimate, and then wrote a book on how to do regression properly.
Okay.
But I won't go into that any further, because this presentation is on parts therapy. There are
Yes.
other variations of parts therapy that go by different names, such as subliminal therapy, voice dialogue, 6-step reframe, internal family systems, and they're all based on the same concept that we have various parts. Like Bradshaw, who was very well known in America in the 20th century, taught that we all have an inner preschooler, an inner grade schooler, an inner adolescent, and when we mature, an inner adult, an inner parent. And for years, I used to teach that we don't want to have new parts. And I have all the parts I want, thank you, God. And then I ended up being mistaken, because shortly into the 21st century, I found that I had a new part, an inner
Okay.
grandpa, after one of my twin daughters gave birth to my first grandchild.
Hmm.
So we develop these parts as
Hmm.
appropriate as we travel the timeline of life.
Okay.
So I probably had an inner protector part the first time I got into a fight as a child. Does
I
that make
mean,
sense?
yes, 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 Roy. Thank you. And Roy, my question is, some people, there are different school of thoughts, so I respect everyone's views. However, there are some people, they say that there's nothing called parts. It's just a metaphor, which in a way is true. It is like, what exactly, like, what makes a people say that parts therapy is not safe? There's nothing called parts therapy. Don't delve into it. So, what is your answer for that?
There are genuine pitfalls for someone who is not trained properly.
Okay, okay,
Okay. And I have a chapter devoted to the pitfalls in the official parts therapy textbook that was published by Crown House Publishing
mm,
in 2005. One of the pitfalls, for example, is looking for a negative part. I don't look for the negative part, but I do look for the part that is causing the presenting problem.
okay,
And then I call out whatever part wants to overcome the presenting problem,
mhm,
and I do not tell the parts what to do. Instead, I act as a mediator.
okay, okay,
Some people do it as an arbitrator. Some people tell each part what to do. And if you tell the parts what to do, if you break rapport with a part, you can end up losing rapport with the whole client.
okay, okay,
So I endeavor to be neutral, and my job is to help the parts come to terms of agreement by asking the right questions. And if the parts will not allow me to mediate a resolution, then I will call out a third part, asking whatever part of John, or the client's name, can offer some words of wisdom to help us get past this impasse. Please come forward. You're a very important part of John, or whatever the client's name is. And when you're ready to communicate, please say the words "I am here," or move the yes finger. And if I'm doing it on Zoom, I'll say a nod the head.
okay, okay. Thank you.
So when the answer comes from within the client's inner mind, that is very self-empowering.
Okay,
And it's much more empowering to the client than if I were to come up with a resolution and try to convince the parts what to do. Charlie
right.
actually arbitrated. And my first update to his technique was to mediate instead of arbitrate. Charlie
Okay.
would listen to both sides, and then he would act like an arbitrator
Mhm.
and come up with his own resolution and then convince the parts on what to do. He was a good debater. I'm a lousy debater, so the first update I made to his technique was to mediate instead of arbitrate.
Okay, okay, got it.
And
And
I've made a few more updates through the years based on what I've learned from experience. For example, I won't call out more than 3 parts,
okay,
because it ends up being a parts party. And if you have too many parts arguing, you can waste a lot of time, which is expensive to the client. So if the third part is unable to come up with suggestions to help the other 2 parts come to terms of agreement, if I call out a fourth part, I will ask, if the client believes in God or a higher power, I will ask for whatever part is most closely connected to the client's perception of God or higher power to come forward, and I'll ask for words of divine wisdom. If I do not know whether the client believes in God, I'll ask for whatever part has your best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience. Will you please come forward and provide some words of wisdom to help us get past this impasse?
Okay. Okay.
So that's how I handle those situations. And it's a protocol that has passed the test of time. And as I mentioned, there are other variations of parts therapy. One of the most profound was created by the director of the chair of the psychology or the psychiatry department at the University of San Diego decades ago. And he was amazing. He wrote a book, Subliminal Therapy, and it was quite amazing, because what he would do is he would call out that part of the patient that had the best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience, and he called that part centrum. And for some reason, his last name is slipping my mind. It's Edward Yeager. Okay.
Jaeger.
And
Yes. Arian.
he wrote Subliminal Therapy. It was published by Crown House Publishing in, I believe, 2012 or 2011. And what was amazing to me is he documented many cures. And when I met him personally, he told me that many of his patients told him that they felt centrum. He called that part centrum, that had the center of a person's wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience. He told me that many of his patients told him that they believed centrum was God or Christ or Holy Spirit or Buddha or Yahweh or higher self or Michael the Archangel. And in essence, I consider Edwin Yeager a pioneer of spiritual parts therapy.
I was fortunate to get trained in this method, right? It's amazing.
Oh, so you're trained in subliminal therapy.
Subliminal therapy. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Did you get a chance then to meet Dr. Yeager personally?
No, 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 no. I got trained from someone else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was an amazing man, and I greatly appreciated the chance to meet him personally.
Wow.
That
Amazing.
that was an awesome experience. So I consider Dr. Edwin Yeager a pioneer of spiritual parts therapy,
Thank you for
which
bringing that up.
I believe has the potential of changing the whole paradigm of hypnotherapy. And who knows, maybe before the end of the 21st century, it could change the whole paradigm of healthcare.
Yes, hopefully.
So
Yeah.
who knows?
Who
But
knows?
I feel incredibly privileged to have been asked by Charles Stebbits to continue his work with parts therapy.
Thank you.
And I've been greatly encouraged by increasing numbers of hypnotherapists all around the world discovering the ability to help clients access divine wisdom during hypnosis.
yes, yes. You also conduct spiritual hypnosis workshops as well, I guess, right? Right?
That is correct.
Yes. And
Normally, when I teach a 2-day parts therapy workshop, I
mhm.
spend the last half of day 2, the last half of the afternoon on day 2, discussing spiritual parts therapy.
Oh, wow.
I've developed a particular protocol where I'll call out that part of the client that is most closely connected to his or her perception of God or higher power. And I have no right to try to convert a client to my religious beliefs. So I
Yeah.
work within his or her spiritual belief system, because I have a strong belief that we need to be client-centered. I endeavor to do for the client what I believe he or she would want me to do if the roles were reversed.
Yes. Client-centered. I like that approach. It's not therapist-centered.
Well, in my book, The Art of Hypnotherapy, it's volume 2 of Diversified Client-Centered Hypnosis. In other words, I believe in fitting the technique to the client instead of vice versa. So I don't use parts therapy with everyone. I only use parts therapy when there's an obvious inner conflict, or if it's not obvious whether to use parts therapy or regression therapy, then I'll do some idiomotor response questions. And there are 7 questions I ask. It's based on a system developed decades ago in the 20th century by Cheek and Lacron. They called it the 7 key. Charles Tebbis called it 7 psychodynamics of a symptom. And you ask 7 different questions with yes, no, or I'm not ready to disclose responses, which is idiomotor responses if it's a face-to-face session. But if it's on Zoom, I use head nods. Yes, no, or
Yeah.
I don't know,
I
or I'm not ready to
It's simple.
disclose. And then based on which categories you get a yes in, you can determine whether to use parts therapy or regression therapy or suggestion and imagery, and or whether you have to refer to another qualified professional, because sometimes a current unresolved issue is out of my league. Like if the current unresolved issue is because the client is having marriage problems, they need a marriage counselor, not a hypnotherapist. They might need both, but I used to have a stack of business cards from a fellow student at Charlie's who was a licensed clinical psychologist who specialized in marriage counseling. So if a client's cause of a presenting problem was because of a marriage problem, you can't help a client release the core cause of a problem as long as that core cause is still present. So I often sent him client referrals, giving clients his business card. And he returned the favor because even though he took Charlie's course, he didn't like facilitating parts therapy. So sometimes he would refer his clients to me when they needed hypnotherapy for resolving inner conflicts. And he also sent a number of hypnotherapy students to me when I taught my full 9-month course at Tacoma Community College. So that was a win-win.
Yes. That's a nice. Right. What would you do when a part is so stubborn that it says, let's say, anxiety or something, or that like, no, it's decades of habit, or I don't want, I'm not comfortable. How do we deal that with that part?
I call that a detour. And what I do is I call out a third part. Whatever part of Bob can offer some words of wisdom or suggestions to help us get past this impasse, you're a very important part of Bob. And when you're ready to come forward and provide some suggestions or words of wisdom, please either move the yes finger or say the words, I am here. And then I proceed and let that third part, I ask that part what name it wishes to be called. And then I ask what words of wisdom or suggestions you have to offer.
Okay.
And more often than not, the third part can help bring resolution to the other 2 parts. But when it's not able to bring resolution, if I have to call out a 4th part, then I'm going to call out either that part most closely connected to the client's higher power, or that part that has the highest and best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience. In other words, Centrum.
Okay.
I don't call it Centrum. I still ask what name or title it should be called.
Okay.
And sometimes a part will say, higher self. In fact, years ago, I was working with a smoker. 5 minutes into the intake, he said, whatever you do, you need to realize I'm an atheist. I'm proud of it. So don't do anything that brings anything about religion or God or spirituality into these sessions. And since my client is my employer, I decided to honor his wishes. He comes in for his 4th session and says, I really love your approach to managing stress. I don't smoke anymore when I get stress buttons pushed. He said, but there's a part of me that just keeps resisting all of the good suggestions you've given to me. So he was an obvious candidate for parts therapy. So that part of him that wanted to smoke would not budge an inch.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I called out a third part, I said, whatever part of you has your highest and best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience, or what part can provide some suggestions to help us get past this impasse, you're an important part of Bob. And when you're ready to communicate, please say the words, I am here, or move the yes finger. And then in a very mellow but authoritative tone, I am here. I said, thank you. What name or title shall I call you? I am Bob's higher self.
Wow.
Higher self told the other 2 parts what to do, and within minutes, his inner conflict was resolved. And
Wow.
after a successful parts therapy session, my first words after emerging a client from hypnosis are, isn't this amazing stuff? He said, amazing isn't the half of it. I said, what do you mean? He said, higher self was a spiritual part. Logic dictates that if I have a spiritual part, there must be some sort of God.
Oh.
He says, I don't necessarily think God is a 6-foot tall being, but he said, obviously, if there's a spiritual realm, there has to be some sort of creator. So since it came from him rather than me, if I'd have asked for a spiritual part, he would have probably emerged from hypnosis and continued smoking.
Okay.
But it was one of the most amazing sessions I ever facilitated, because he
Yeah.
enters my office claiming he's a devout atheist,
Yeah.
and then several, 3 sessions later, leaves my office believing in God.
Wow.
That was absolutely amazing. But
Wow.
spiritual parts therapy, I've had the privilege of facilitating with people in most major religions on the planet.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. Awesome. And Rai, however, at times there is like, different parts have exhausted out of ideas, conversation, and this wise part, when we call, no, I don't know. I can't think of anyone. I cannot think of anyone. So there is this resistance. In such situations, how do you introduce a wise part or something they think is better negotiator of other parts to bring in the resolution?
If I know that the client believes in God or a higher power, and a third part can't help resolve the inner conflict,
Okay.
when I call out a fourth part, I will go straight for the higher power part. I'll say, whatever part of you is most closely connected to your perception of God or higher power, I ask you to come forward. You're a very important part of John or Linda, whatever the client's name is. And for your highest and best good, please come forward and provide some words of divine wisdom to help us get past this impasse. And when you're ready to communicate, please say the words, I am here, or move the yes finger, or if it's on Zoom, nod your head. And then when the part says, I am here, or I see the yes finger or the head nod, I'll say, unlike calling out the third part, instead of saying, what name or title shall I call you, I will say, thank you for communicating. Is two-way verbal communication permitted? And then if I get a yes response, then I'll say, what name or title shall I call you? And common names have been God, Goddess, Divine Love, Divine
Mhm.
Light, Christ, Yahweh, Higher Self, Michael the Archangel,
Mm.
occasionally Gabriel the Archangel, but
Okay.
in 40 years, only twice have I heard Raphael the Archangel. I have also heard names such as Zaria, and I don't remember which country, but years ago someone told me Zaria was the name of God in one of the countries in Asia. I don't
Okay.
remember which country that was. And occasionally Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost, uh, Spirit Guide, Guardian Angel of a client.
Guardian.
Yeah. So
What about the case of atheist, Roy, or they're like they don't know any resources, and what do we do in such situation?
in what situation? I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Non-believers, non-believers, atheists, they don't have any reference of a mentor or a teacher or trainer or higher power, and that said, I have no one.
Well, if either A, I know the client is an atheist, or B, I do not know whether the client believes in God or a higher power, I ask for that part of you that has your highest and best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience.
Okay.
Whatever part of you has your highest and best wisdom, knowledge, understanding, training, and experience, you are a very important part of Roger. And when you are willing to communicate and offer some words of wisdom to help us get past this impasse, please come forward and say the words, I am here, or move the yes finger.
Okay.
And in that case, unlike the spiritual hypnosis, I say, what name or title shall I call you?
Okay. Okay.
I don't ask, is two-way communication permitted?
Got it.
And on rare occasions, it'll be obviously a spiritual part. Oh, one very interesting situation. Years ago, the hypnotherapist asked me to do a parts therapy session for her because she was obese and wasn't comfortable accepting clients for weight loss because of the fact that she felt like a hypocrite if she saw somebody for weight management. So she asked me to do parts therapy to find out why she had an inner conflict about weight. And what happened is when I said, whatever part of you wants to overcome the weight, after I talk to the conflicting part first, I always call out the part causing the presenting problem first. And then after that part talks, then I'll call out the motivating part that's motivating the client to overcome the problem. It turned out her motivating part accused the conflicting part of being an entity.
Oh, okay.
That happens occasionally. In fact, in 2006, I did a parts therapy workshop at the London College of Clinical Hypnosis. And my volunteer was a psychotherapist who'd been dealing off and on with weight and had had several variations of parts therapy in previous sessions. And the conflicting part didn't want to cooperate. So when I called out a third part, the third part came forward, wanted to be called anger. That surprised me as well as the people that were in the room. And when I said, what job do you do? Or Linda, I'm changing the name.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm angry at her. because she's so busy being a good wife and a good mother and a good psychotherapist that she never takes enough time to do what she wants to do.
Oh,
And then she rattled on a few more negative sentences. And then one of the other parts said, anger is an entity. Why don't you send it into the light? And, I didn't say it out loud, but I'm thinking, oh, God, does this have to happen in front of the LCCH? So then I calmed myself by touching my thumb to my peaceful place trigger, which is my middle finger. Most clients use their index finger, and sent out a silent prayer asking God for words of wisdom. And then I immediately, that one time it's safe to assume a client believes in a higher power is if one part accuses another of being an entity. So I said, whatever part of you is most closely connected to God or your perception of higher power, it's important for your highest and best good for that part to come forward and provide some words of divine wisdom. And when you're ready to communicate, please say the words, I am here, or move the yes finger. And then in a goddess-like voice, I am here. And her higher power part, after emerging, I said, thank you for emerging. What name shall I call you, or a title? And if memory serves me correctly, I think the response was Serena, which is a word that means peace.
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that part immediately told the motivating part and the conflicting parts, quit accusing anger of being an entity because she's a legitimate part. And then she addressed anger and said, you need to remember your original purpose, which was to be her inspiration. So I want you to change your name to Muse. And then the spiritual part told Muse and the other two parts to work together to set aside time every month for her to explore her desire to write. And then a couple of months later, I got this beautiful thank you card from London that she sent to me, said that she had actually had an article published. And then several months later, I had my farthest referral in my entire career, because I get this call from a lady and she says, hi, my best friend is someone who volunteered for a demonstration at the LCCH. And my husband and I have to come to Seattle to see a medical professional for our son. And she told me to see you for parts therapy while I'm there. So
Wow.
that's the farthest referral I've had in my entire career. And it was a successful session. And meanwhile, I got a thank you card in the mail from the lady in London who told me she felt like she won the lotto after having that article published.
Wow.
And speaking of the London College of Clinical Hypnosis, they have hired me to teach an online parts therapy by Zoom the 21st and 22nd of this month.
Yes, I'll be
And
putting the link as well to the viewers. Right.
thank you. It's an honor to teach for them because I've heard from different sources that they are the most credible hypnosis school in the entire world.
Awesome.
And I just feel incredibly privileged not only to have taught there in person in 2006, but to be asked again to teach on Zoom. That's
Amazing.
COVID-19 was a curse to the whole world, but one good thing that came from it is I'm now comfortable doing online sessions
Live.
and online workshops because I never would have done this
Yeah.
before 2020.
Yeah. And people across the world can get trained being at the comfort of their home.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Although my wife is totally disabled and bedridden, so I no longer have the time to teach my full 9-month hypnotherapy course.
Oh,
But
okay.
I feel privileged to have taught it for quite a number of years.
Thank you.
But I
And
still teach workshops because hypnotherapy has not just been a career, it's been a passion. In fact, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about parts therapy is because one parts therapy session decades ago helped me permanently overcome migraine headaches. I
oh,
had my first migraine when I was 6 years old in first grade. And as I grew older, the frequency and severity of the migraines increased to where I spent decades having 2 or 3 migraine headaches a month and 2 or 3 annoying headaches a week. They weren't disabling, but it made it hard for me through school to do homework on evenings when I had a headache. But then when I went to college, the headaches increased. And then my first marriage was not a good marriage. And the frequency and severity of my migraines increased. And I suffered with them until after I got certified in hypnotherapy. And after suffering 2 or 3 migraines a month for decades, I can count on 3 fingers the number of migraines I've had in over 3 decades.
wow.
That's a difference as great as day and night.
Yes.
And it would be difficult for me to plan 2-day workshops if I had to be concerned about being in bed with a migraine. So now you know why I'm so passionate about parts therapy,
Yes.
because it changed one parts therapy session, changed my life.
Wow.
That makes a real
Beautiful.
believer out of me.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Uh, Roy, ever happened that you had to ask a part to go away from the client's life forever? Ever happened that?
I have often been asked by one part to dismiss another part. I don't do that unless the higher power part tells me to.
Okay. Okay.
Now, it occasionally will happen where one part will say, that part's an entity, you need to send it into the light.
Mhm.
In that case, I immediately call out the higher power part and ask for words of wisdom. Most of the time, the higher power part will tell me and the client that the alleged entity is a legitimate part.
Okay.
If, and this happens rarely, but it does occasionally happen, if the higher power part tells me that it is an entity and I need to send it into the light, I will do what the higher power part tells me to do.
Okay.
And I do not know whether it's a real attaching entity or whether it's an introject, but in either event, if the client's higher power instructs me to send the part or entity into the light in the name of Christ or Buddha or whatever, I will do what the higher power part tells me to do. And that's happened a few times during my career, but not very often. And on one occasion, an obese lady said, "What's he doing here?" I said, "What do
Oh,
you mean?" She said, "Joshua, I'm Jewish, both by race and religion."
okay.
And I said, "Well, let's ask him." Response, "So was I in my last incarnation." And that was funny. And then the part that called himself Joshua instructed me to send the negative part into the light in the name of Christ.
Okay.
That was amazing for her because she was Jewish, both by race and religion. So we both had a surprise. And
Yeah.
then she emailed me months later stating that the pound started peeling off. She was a fellow hypnotherapist who asked me to do parts therapy at a national hypnosis conference years ago.
Okay. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, and then another amazing thing, several years ago, I was invited to teach parts therapy in Dubai, and half the people in the room were Muslims. And the volunteer for the demonstration ended up having a spiritual part that wanted to be called Christ.
Okay.
Uh, I was quite surprised at that. And then turned out one of the people in attendance was wearing a white robe, and he wasn't surprised. He actually gave me a Quran as a gift and told me that he believed that Jesus actually lived. So I was quite amazed at that. I've hit, of all places, with a room where half of the people were Muslims, because I had to have the break at exactly precise time for them to do their afternoon prayer.
Okay.
That's the last higher power part I would have expected to emerge.
Yes. Agree.
But I always remember the words Charles Tebbett said so many times I got tired of hearing them. And then I found that I've used those same words hundreds of times during my years of teaching my full course and in my workshops. Deal with what emerges.
Okay.
So
Deal with
I
what?
dealt with what emerged.
Yes. That was totally client-centered. That's it.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And when I've called out the higher part, uh, the most common I've heard is God, sometimes goddess, sometimes I am who I am. I am he, she, they with many names, but with no names. But for purposes of this session, call me I am, because I am who I am. The first time I heard that, I literally had goosebumps head to toe.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. Spirit guide, guardian angel, and on occasion, a deceased relative who's
Oh,
on the other side. That doesn't happen very often, but it has happened a few times. But I've heard Buddha,
mhm.
Yahweh, Christ, God, Holy Spirit, I am who I am. Higher self is also very common.
Wow. Roy, do you suggest hypnotherapists who are using parts therapy to be proficient with age regression, past life regression, such tools as well? Does that help? Is it mandatory?
When I teach a parts therapy workshop, I actually encourage all of the attendees to learn competent regression therapy before they use parts therapy with a fee-paying client. And the reason is because on occasion,
Mhm.
a part will go into regression when you facilitate parts therapy.
Mhm.
So it's important to learn regression therapy first, or if you learn parts therapy first, then learn regression therapy as soon after as possible before you use parts therapy with a fee-paying client. Otherwise, if you don't understand the risk of false memories, or if you don't know the difference between leading and guiding, you can take the client down the wrong path and either A, create false memories, or B, have an abreaction that you're not qualified to handle.
Yeah.
So there are risks for people who use parts therapy if they have not already learned competent regression therapy. I will allow people who have not learned regression to attend my workshop, but I encourage them to wait until they learn regression before they use parts therapy. Because if a part goes into regression, you better know how to handle it. Otherwise, the client can be worse off than before he or she saw you.
Got it. Got it, Roy. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're
And Roy,
welcome.
is it possible for a trained hypnotherapist to read your books and get started with parts therapy? Is it possible? Or do you recommend training?
I have occasionally encountered people in
Mhm,
my parts therapy workshops who bought my book,
mhm.
Hypnosis for Inner Conflict Resolution, Introducing Parts Therapy, and tell me that they've used parts therapy a few times, but felt they wanted to get better at it. So they came to my workshop
Okay.
after buying my book and using parts therapy. But
Okay.
my recommendation is to get both.
Get both. Why not? To get better. Yeah.
And I don't have a copy of my regression text here, but it's The Art of Hypnotic Regression Therapy, a clinical guide.
Okay.
And it was published in 2012 by Crown House Publishing. And Bruce Eimer, PhD, ABPP, was my co-author. And that book helped build a bridge between psychology and hypnotherapy in the United States.
Wow. Awesome.
And Bruce and I have become almost like brothers.
Okay. And right, what are your suggestions for the fellow hypnotherapists who hesitate that, like, I'll give you an example. Like whole parts therapy has been facilitated, client felt happy, but you know what? In the end of the session, they say, yeah, it was good, but I don't know, was it this part talking and this part talking? It was fun, it was good, but I really don't know if the changes are going to happen, etc., etc. When client comes up with such doubts, even after this session, they believe it, but they don't believe it, a kind of confusion. How does a hypnotherapist handle that situation?
That is very rare.
Mhm.
And I can probably count on my fingers a number of times that's happened during my career, because I do not facilitate parts therapy without giving the client a pre-talk.
Pre-talk. Okay. Okay.
1 minute of communication is worth a month of resolution. So, that's kind of like the old phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. 1 minute of communication is worth a month of resolution. So, more than once, I've encountered a client during my career who, during the intake, has uh, uh, said, "Do you work with somebody who has DID or multiple personalities?" And I said, "Why do you ask?"
Mhm.
Well, because I saw a marriage counselor a couple of years ago for uh, a problem, and she was great as a marriage counselor. So then I asked her if she could recommend a good hypnotherapist for weight management. And I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "Well, I'm a certified hypnotherapist, so I'll weight management." And I said, "Okay, so then what happened?" Well, next thing I knew, I have these various personalities speaking. So
Okay.
what happened is she spent months of stress believing that she was an undiagnosed DID. And then when I'm talking about that in one of my last hypnotherapy classes I taught before my wife became totally disabled, lady in the front row starts crying.
Oh,
And I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "That was me." I said, "I don't remember ever meeting you before you took my course." She said, "No." She said, "I was seeing a psychotherapist for some issues, and she did a variation of parts therapy without giving me a pre-talk." And she said, "I spent almost 2 years totally stressed out, believing that I was an undiagnosed multiple personality person." And she said, "Do you want to know what saved me?" I said, "What?" She said, and she held this book up. She said, I got a hold of this book. And she said, I was willing to fly all the way across the country to meet you. And she said, imagine my surprise when I found out your school was less than a mile from my home. And she said, I can't thank you enough for writing that book. So you don't ever want to initiate either parts therapy or any of the variations of parts therapy without giving a pre-talk first.
And
Does that answer your question?
yes, yes, right. That is very much important. That's the reason this conversation is much more behalf of so many fellow hypnotherapists, and I'm sure they are going to benefit from this talk. And right, even after doing a very deep work of all the resolutions have been resolved, the inner conflicts have been, everything happened. Yet in the next session, client comes up that, yeah, this session was good, everything was in. Again, I feel something is missing. Ever happens in your sessions like that?
I take very detailed notes when I do parts therapy. I take more
Okay.
detailed notes than
Mm-hmm.
any other technique I use
Mm-hmm.
because occasionally a client has to have more than one parts therapy session to resolve an inner conflict.
Okay.
And usually
Mm-hmm.
I know that before the conclusion of the first session. And what's nice is the following week I can pick up where I left off. But
Okay.
on a
Okay.
few occasions, a client has backslid because one of the parts didn't accept the terms of agreement and metaphorically crossed their fingers when I asked, do all parts accept the terms of agreement? I have a step-by-step protocol that has passed the test of time. It's not the only way to help
Okay.
clients resolve inner conflicts, but I've made a few updates during my career on what I call the 11-step process. So it's a protocol that has passed the test of time to get results. It's not the only one that works because just like there is more than one way to get from London, England to uh, New York, New York,
Yeah.
you can fly, you can go by ship,
Yeah.
or in your country, you can take a plane or you can drive, or you can probably take a train as well to go from one city to another.
Yes.
There's more than one way to help a client resolve an inner conflict. That's why in my workshop, I cover the variations early in the first day. But the protocol I've developed and evolved during my career of almost 4 decades has passed the test of time and
Okay.
gets results for most of the clients most of the time. When people backslide, sometimes they come in for parts therapy tune-up. Like years ago, a realtor who was struggling saw me and he had parts therapy. And then 6 months later, he came in for what he called a parts therapy tune-up. And then a year later, he said, well, I'm doing really well, but I would like another parts therapy tune-up. So I
Okay.
did another parts therapy tune-up. And then several years later, he was a multimillionaire instead of a struggling realtor. And he asked me to give a talk on benefits of hypnosis to the real estate agents he had because he became a broker.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's awesome. Thank you for, in this conversations, thank you for bringing certain case studies as well, Roy, so that they are more relatable and get imprinted. And it's kind of turning into a master class now.
Well, I've learned from my clients. In fact, it was through one of my clients that I discovered spiritual hypnosis back in the mid 80s. A lady saw me for weight management,
Okay.
and um, at her third or fourth session, she said, there's a part of me that keeps resisting all those good suggestions, and I don't know why. Well, it was obvious that parts therapy was indicated.
Mhm.
So when I did parts therapy, the conflicting part that was causing her to overeat would not budge an inch,
Okay.
and actually got quite angry at both me and the motivating part for
Oh,
motivating her to see me in the first place. And then
okay.
the motivating part got angry, and the stress was blatantly obvious with both parts. I mean, they were getting into a shouting match.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was quite freaky. And then um, all of a sudden, I used my peaceful place trigger. Most clients use their index finger. Mine is my middle finger. I said, take a deep breath and go way down. And as I'm doing that, I'm mentally asking God for some intuitive guidance. And I suddenly remembered that during the intake, she told me she was very involved with her church.
Okay. Okay.
So then I said, whatever part of you, because knowing she was involved in a church, I knew she believed in God. So I said, whatever part of you is most closely connected to God or Christ or the Holy Spirit, it's very important to come forward and provide some words of wisdom to help us get past this impasse. And then after the parts, almost being shouting, when I said, whatever part of you is willing to provide some words of wisdom, please say the words, I am here, or move the yes finger. In a goddess-like voice, I am here. And I said, thank you. What name or title shall I call you? I am the Holy Spirit.
Beautiful.
And I said, what words of wisdom or suggestions do you have for the other two parts? And Holy Spirit told the other two parts what to do. And within minutes, her problem was resolved and the parts started peeling off. So that's how I discovered spiritual parts therapy
Wow.
decades ago.
Beautiful, beautiful, right?
And since I taught my course at a college, I didn't discuss that in the classroom.
Yeah.
I kept it, I kept it in the closet. However, even though I don't break client confidentiality, there's nothing to stop the client from talking. So not too many weeks afterwards, a lady calls me on the phone and asks if I can do a spiritual parts therapy session for her.
Okay.
So as time passed, the frequency started increasing. And then I had some friends, a former Methodist minister who had a hypnosis school. His name was Arthur Winkler, and his wife was Pam Winkler, who was a child psychologist.
Mhm.
And they became friends of mine. And one time when I had lunch with them, I was telling Art and Pam about discovering spiritual hypnosis. And Pam says, you can't keep this in the closet. You need to write a book about it.
Okay.
You need to
I
bring
was
it out of the
fortunate
closet.
I was fortunate to interview them as well.
You were,
Yeah.
well, several years passed, and eventually I ended up writing a chapter about spiritual parts
It was.
therapy as the
Wow.
last chapter of my parts therapy text. And then I thought, okay, mission accomplished.
Yes.
And then Pam said, Roy, you're supposed to write a whole book about
All good.
spiritual hypnosis.
Yeah.
And then, well, I tried several times and things kept happening. And then I was on the receiving end of spiritual hypnosis, wanting to know when I was supposed to write the book. And I got vague answers. All will be revealed in due time. And when the time is right, you will know it.
Wow.
That wasn't the answer I wanted. And then uh, in 2014, a lady sent me an email and said, why don't you ask other hypnotherapists to contribute to the book? So when I read that email, I knew that I knew it was time to write the book. So over 24 well-known hypnotherapists from around the world contributed to The Art of Spiritual Hypnosis, which was published by Blooming Twig. I can no longer sell that on my website, so if you want it, you'll have to buy it from Amazon.com.
Okay. Thank you for that. And Roy, are there any situations where parts therapy is not recommended?
If a client sees me for fear of flying, regression therapy is indicated, not parts therapy.
Okay.
Also, if I do a pre-talk and the client does not like the concept of parts therapy, I will endeavor to use other techniques instead, because the client is my employer. But I very rarely use parts therapy on a first session. I believe the first session should be suggestion and imagery most of the time, unless a client requests something specifically. Like if a client requests a past life regression, I'll do that, but I'll say, why do you ask?
Yes.
And reason is, years ago, a lady saw me for smoking cessation, and then you always have to ask, are you ready to be hypnotized before you do the hypnosis? And when I said, are you ready to be hypnotized? She said, can I ask you one more question first? I said, sure. She said, do you do past life regressions? I said, only when a client requests it. And she said, well, I thank you for your honesty, but now that I know you do the devil's work, I'm going to see another hypnotherapist for smoking cessation. Ouch. So if a client asks me, do you do past life regressions? My response is, why do you ask?
Why do you ask?
You bet. Because there are many people who do not believe in past life regressions or past lives. And they think we have one life, and then after one life, we have a permanent eternal sentence, in heaven or hell.
No.
Well, I'm pleased to discover that there are a number of Christians who believe in past lives. Most do not, but many do.
And my last question, right? What is your suggestion to hypnotherapists who have hesitation or who were misguided that parts therapy is not safe? Once again, what's your final message to the therapist?
Get trained competently in parts therapy, or don't use it, because it's better not to use it than it is to misuse it. So if you are not trained in parts therapy or have doubts about it, if parts therapy is needed, refer the client to someone who's well trained in parts therapy. Occasionally, I've had a client referred to me by another hypnotherapist who was not confident in parts therapy. So, and I would say the same about regression therapy. Either get competent training in regression therapy, know the risk of false memories, or don't use regression. Refer the client to someone who is well trained in regression therapy.
Yes.
It's important to stay within your qualifications. And I have met hypnotherapists who believe they have to do a session for everyone who darkens their door. I have literally referred hundreds of clients to other professionals during my career because I was not qualified to work with them. For example, if your client is in an abusive marriage, unless you are a trained abuse counselor, don't go over your head. You might work with the client for a simple goal, but if the core cause of the problem is because of being an abuse victim, that's beyond your qualifications. Unless you're trained in that area, you need to refer the person. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Roy, for your time. And it was excellent conversation. I didn't expect that it turns into beautiful case studies discussion and like a mini masterclass on parts therapy. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. And I hope some of your viewers sign up for my parts therapy workshop with the
Yes,
London
I'll be
College of
providing
Clinical
the link as
Hypnosis.
well. Right. I will provide the complete link of this your upcoming workshop as well.
Thank you. And it's a Star Trekkie. May you practice long and prosper.
Thank you. Thank